Good morning, Swans. Because I've got exams, I had no time to prepare something decent, so I just asked my good friend Seve, who's going to give us a little insight into a deep topic, which is God. With me today is Seve.
Yeah, hello guys. Yeah, so in this little podcast, I'll be talking about, I'll be addressing the question, does God exist? And I'll really be doing two things. First, discussing why this question is quite hard to answer, and two, providing an example of a theory that's provided by the man himself, Descartes, in an attempted answer to this question. So before we start, what do I mean when I'm talking about God? Obviously, due to there being a lot of different religions out there, there are different conceptions of gods, whether they're one, two, monotheism, polytheism. What I'm going to be talking about is, I guess I'm really talking about monotheism.
And so religions which just believe in one
entity. Yeah, basically. And my conception of God, or at least what I would describe the term as, is an omnipotent being. So it's a very abstract conception of God, because I think that very much simplifies things. So onto the first part of my talk. Why is the question very hard to answer? So before I do that, let's just talk a bit about two common answers to this question. First is one it comes from a scientific perspective. And what you find is a lot of people saying God does not exist because there is no hard evidence that they do. And the second one is more of a faith-based answer, in which they argue that God's existence is a matter of faith, right? And so those are the two common conceptions. I'll be providing another one later, but I'll get onto that in a minute. So what about the scientific one? Why do I think there's an issue with it? Okay, so to explain why I don't think it works, why I think it's a bit unfair, I'm going to be borrowing from another philosopher called Immanuel Kant and discussing his concept of two different realms of reality. Two different realms of reality. So, Kant talks about two different realms. There being two different realms in life in regards to reality. One, he calls the sensible realm. This is the physical realm, full of objects which we can touch. And it's this realm which can be explained by science, by knowledge from physics, biology. And then there's the second, he calls it the intelligible realm. It is the more abstract realm, in which is made up of abstract concepts and ideas. Let me use an example to illustrate the difference between these two realms. If I am to raise my hand, then the raising of my hand can be explained by the sensible realm, by physical, biological processes. But the sensible realm, science, cannot explain why I raised my hand in the first place. Imagine if someone asked me a question about my political leanings. Science cannot explain what motivated me to raise my hand at that instance. That's where the intelligible realm came. That's where we're talking about the intelligible realm. The intelligible realm. Okay, and so how does this link to God? What I would say is that God does not exist in the sensible realm, and therefore the notion of whether they exist cannot be explained by science. And so because it's something that is occupied in that exists in the
abstract.
Really. It's more of an abstract concept. There is no hard evidence, and therefore it's unfair to dismiss their total existence by quoting a lack of hard evidence, because God exists in the rational, in the intelligible realm. And so this leads me on to the second part of my talk, in which I'll be talking about Wren Descartes' attempted proving of the existence of God. As what he does, he tries and proves God's existence within this intelligible realm. He tries to prove God's existence not by searching for hard empirical facts, but rather through the use of core reason alone. Okay, so let me just outline his theory. Before I do so, I'm going to introduce 4 concepts as they will help us understand his ultimate theory. The first is Wren's Descartes' conception of reality, in that he doesn't view reality as being an absolute, but rather as existing on a spectrum. In other words, he believes that some objects, some substances are more real than others. And so we have a spectrum that varies from less real to more real. And on this spectrum, there are 3 main categories. At the top being most real, infinite substance. An example of this would be God, or at least Descartes would say. Then below this, in the middle, finite substance. This would be something like our cells, physical things like a table or rock. And lastly, the least real properties of something. So for example, the color brown. So the table is brown. That would be a property. And Descartes would argue that this is less real than the finite substance of the table. So that's one thing. That's one thing to note. Second thing is Descartes' conception of the different types of realities. And so he echoes Kant in that he divides reality into 2 parts. He calls it formal reality and representational reality, where formal reality is basically the same as what I was talking about before, the sensible realm. It's occupied by physical objects. And representational reality, more abstract things like thoughts, ideas, etc. So I've talked about 2 things, and we need to understand 2 more principles before I can get onto his argument. The first is the levels of reality principle, which is what I discussed at the start, in that reality exists as a spectrum, right? So that's one thing. Then the second principle is something called causal adequacy, or at least I believe that is. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. And this principle outlines that the causes of something must be as real as the product. So, for example, a cake must be made up of substances which are at least as real as it itself is. A cake would be a finite substance, and it itself is made up of the finite substances of sugar, wheat, etc. Right? And so what I've just discussed, first, Descartes' levels of reality. Second, his 2 types of reality. And third and fourth, the 2 different principles. The first being the levels of reality principle, and second, the causal adequacy. And so how this is applied to God. So whereas Descartes reasons from these 2 principles is that God is an infinite substance, right? And so the idea of God, so us being able to have the idea, so what he's talking about is the idea thought. He's talking about representational reality, or in the intelligible realm, more abstract concept. So he talks about that for us to have the idea of God being an infinite substance, the causes of this idea must at least be as real as the thought itself. The thought itself is an infinite substance. Therefore, the cause itself must be an infinite substance. Therefore, from this, he reasons that it could only have been God who put this thought into our minds, because only God is an infinite substance. And so that's how Descartes attempts to use reason alone to prove the existence of God. And there's been a lot of debate about whether this argument is valid. I myself think that it is not, but I'm going to leave it up to you to find out why. So I don't know if you see me on the corridor, share your ideas with me. I'll be very happy to have a nice little chat.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Seve. I think that was very interesting. It's clear that you're the school's philosopher.
I wouldn't say so. That goes to Mr. Newton, head of talk.
Okay. Well, you'll have
Legend.
to fight it out between you. So yeah, thank you very much, Seve, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Peace out.
Bye.